So many moms feel stuck and isolated, like they've got to keep it all together and can't say how hard it really is. On Let's Get Real, we talk about the real stuff, motherhood, mental health, and everything in between, so you don't feel like you have to carry it alone anymore. Because in order to heal, we have to get real. If you're feeling overwhelmed, grab the Overwhelmed Mom's Guide. It's totally free and made to help you feel like yourself again. The link is in the show notes. Let's jump in. What if the greatest gift you could give your kids isn't just love or stability, but your own healing? So many of us as moms think that we can show up secure for our kids without ever having to deal with the wounds that we carry. But Bev Mitelman says we can't skip this step. And the truth is, our healing becomes the foundation for theirs. Bev Mitelman is the founder of Securely Loved and a certified attachment practitioner. After growing up in a chaotic, unpredictable home herself, Bev has dedicated her career to helping others break generational cycles through understanding attachment, healing their own wounds, and creating more secure, connected relationships. She's also a mom of 2 sons and brings both her personal story and over 25 years of professional experience to this conversation. Bev, thank you so much for being here today. I am really looking forward to get to dive into on this topic of attachment styles and what this looks like in the many areas of our life with parenting, relationships, even our relationship with ourselves. And so thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled.
Yes. Okay. So before we dive in, can you share a little bit of your own story, like what your childhood was like and how that really set you on the path of exploring attachment?
Yeah, I can. So my childhood was chaotic, right? Unfortunately, I grew up in a home where there was not really a stable frame, meaning there was always conflict in the home. There was always a lot of mental illness, a lot of stress and anxiety. And so, unfortunately, it didn't feel safe. Right. And unfortunately, I often say that for a child to feel safe in their home, they need at least one parent who's emotionally stable. Right. In my case, there were sort of issues on both sides. So my childhood was difficult from an emotional standpoint. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't have 3 meals a day and a roof over my head and parents who did love me. They did. But it was also really chaotic. And so what that did is it instilled a whole set of patterns into my mind and every child's mind for what it is to give and receive love, what it is to interact with other people, what parts of yourself are safe to share, and what do I need to hide to try to stem getting a response from a negative response from someone else, right? So I was so unaware of attachment styles, obviously, growing up. And I tripped over this work years ago, and having already, experienced and studied other modalities of therapy, there was something different about attachment styles that when I got to this and I really did dive, I was like, it explains so much. It explains about myself. You know, why I have trouble trusting people, why I think the way I do, the things that I say, my behaviors. And so, from there, I was like, other people need to know about this.
Yes, that's so good. And I'm wondering how you found, like looking back and reflecting once you did dive into this work, what did you notice as a child as far as how you adapted? Like what that looked like, and now that you have language for it, what you would even call it.
Right. And this really gets into the framework of attachment styles, right? So we have two large groupings where we have what we call people who have a secure attachment, and we'll get into that in a moment, and people who have an insecure attachment. And within the lens or the continuum of insecure attachment, there are 2 ways that a child who is insecurely attached to their caregiver, there are 2 maladaptations, strategies that they will either take to survive that situation. And that's really the foundation of these two different styles. One child might choose to become over congenial, people please, tiptoe around someone, become the parent, put their needs last to please everyone else, because that's how they determine they can keep the attachment to their parent. They can please their parents and they can keep the attachment, thereby keeping themselves safe. And what's so important to understand is that our attachment to our caregivers when we're really young, like toddlers, like infants to toddlers, as humans, we cannot survive without the attachment to our caregiver. And so it really is, if we lose that bond and that attachment, it threatens our survival. It's that important. And so a child who feels that the parent is displeased with them will very quickly, in order to preserve that attachment, because they need, for the they're trying to limit that threat to their survival, they will adapt. And so the first person that I describe here is sort of the roots of the anxious preoccupied, or as we know, sort of more in adult terms, the people pleaser.
Okay.
Right? This is the person who puts their needs last, always focused on the other people in their life. They tend to be very generous. They tend to be very loving, but they also tend to be quite emotionally volatile, emotionally dysregulated. Because in childhood, they were never given much space to feel their needs or to express themselves, because it would signal discontent, displeasure. They didn't learn how to self-regulate. And so what happens is that they become so overly reliant on the external people, often their romantic partners, but even other family members or close friends, to be their sounding board.
Interesting.
Right. So, and I'm sure, Jenna, you have people like this in your life where something happens. Let's say they get into a small tiff. I'll use an example of a woman who's dating a man. And let's say they get into a small tiff. Probably not a really big deal, but it feels like a really big deal to this person. And they'll call you and spend an hour on the phone with you dissecting every little thing that happened. And then when they're done with you, they'll call me and tell me everything that happened. And then they'll call our third friend and they do this because they're incapable. They haven't learned how to self-soothe.
Oh my gosh, that's huge. Huge.
You have a friend like that?
I am literally thinking of myself. So yes, a very dear friend. Her name's Jenna. I'm not kidding. I'm like, you are reading my mail, because it's literally, as you're describing this, I'm like, yep, all these memories, and thinking of, yes, very much that is at the core, very much how I adapted. Yeah. And I've been in codependency recovery for the past couple of years. So I've very intentionally been working on this. A lot of like the people pleasing, a lot of this, even what you're describing as far as calling the friend and seeking out their validation in a way, it's because of not trusting myself, and it's not being able, and even seeing other people and elevating them as higher than me. I hadn't seen myself as an equal to another person to trust what I've experienced is real. So anyways, I want you to keep going on this, because
you said beautifully, Jenna. So, and thank you for your candor, right? Because it's like, it's confronting when we see these things in ourselves, right?
It is.
Yeah. But these are patterns that we see over and over in a lot of people. And I want to mention that attachments are not gender-based, which means that there's just as many men in our world who are anxiously attached as there are women, and so forth, right?
Yes.
So we tend to talk a lot about women who are anxiously attached, but there's plenty of men as well.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So good. And because as you were talking about laying out these examples of growing up being used to pushing your needs to the side, not getting to practice expressing your feelings and emotions. For me, I really, really noticed this significantly as a parent. So in parenting and having young kids, I remember being like, why am I feeling so angry? And then starting to feel resentful of my kids who really aren't doing anything wrong. They're just being kids. But it was because of this continuous pattern of getting used to not feeling like I could never speak up. I couldn't actually say that I felt angry because it was like shamed. And then I wasn't used to expressing and saying, this is what I need. So I would get in this perpetual pattern with my kids who are endlessly needy. I mean, there are endless demands, like that's part of being human. So I try to meet their needs and be like, okay, as soon as I'm done with this, maybe I could get something met for me. And it would be endless. And then I started to feel the anger come up. So yeah, I'm curious, as you could talk more about the attachment styles and what this looks like, and then how that kind of takes shape in parenting.
So anger is common. It's quite common,
okay,
right? Because if you're not meeting your need, you of course will feel anger, right? That's where it tends to build, or contempt or whatnot.
Okay.
But I want to go back to the issue of trust. So one of the key features of someone who's anxious, preoccupied is it's exactly as you've described. They lack self-trust. They don't trust themselves, but they afford others a great deal of trust.
Oh, wow. They'll trust other people far more than themselves.
Right.
Okay.
Which is why you or someone else would reach out for the opinion of 6 people before making a decision.
Wow.
Right? Should I send him the text? Oh, I'm going to read it to you as the text. Is it too many words? Should I put one? Do you think it's the right tone? So have you had those conversations where you needed someone else to tell you exactly how to do it?
Yes. Yes. And then
Because you don't trust yourself.
Yeah, it's such a good point. Wow.
Now, again, that is a pattern that you learned early on. And not knowing your circumstances growing up, I would say that you had, just from patterns, you had at least 1 or 2 parents who were either emotionally unavailable, you got inconsistent love from. So you got enough love from them that you knew it felt good and you wanted more, but it was inconsistent, meaning you got into a cycle of sort of chasing after their love.
Yes, and never knowing when it would come.
Right. Unpredictable, is inconsistent. Maybe there was mental illness in your family. So maybe your mother, your father, you never quite knew if they were going to be loving today or disassociated. We see that with children who grow up with parents, for example, who are alcoholics. Yeah. One day they're really loving and the next day really mean if they drank too much, for example. And the child just can't predict, right? And the child then becomes the parent in themselves where they're taking care of the adult, right? So the whole household runs around this other parent, including the kids. That person holds the key to everyone's emotional state. And so the kid's ability to develop themselves gets thwarted.
Oh my gosh. So then you eventually, that's where this like emotionally stunting process kind of happens, because there is no room for you, because somebody else is like, no, I'm the mood thermometer that all of you are expected to read, and you need to walk on eggshells. So there's no space, like you don't get to take up space. I'm the only one. Kind of. Yeah,
okay. Kind of. Yeah. And so this is also the roots of the people pleasing, right? So we know that we have 4 trauma responses, right? The big ones everyone talks about: fight or flight, right? Or flee. Yeah. So I'm going to fight or I'm going to run away. But there's 2 others, which I know you know about. One is freeze. You just sort of freeze in place out of fear. And the last one that's talked about the least is fawning, which is people pleasing. So it is a trauma response, which is you try to make it so congenial, so likable. You're trying to earn that's another core gets thrown in there, as you feel like you have to earn your love, right? So just existing and being there is not enough. You need to do everything in your power to make you super likable and pleasant so they don't.
Wow.
Right? It's the abandonment wound. So it's like, especially as women, again, attachment styles are not gendered, but there are certain things that we learned socially growing up as women, right? In my generation, it's like women were taught to not take up too much space,
Yeah.
I was actually taught as a child, just sit over there, look pretty, and don't talk.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the messaging, right? It was like, and so you'll do much better in this world. You'll find a nice husband if you're just pretty and you're not too confrontational. Don't be too opinionated. You don't need to run a boardroom. You can do something else that's a more womanly like. These types of narratives, right? They really do serve to sort of quail any true, authentic emotion we all have. We all have emotions through the gamut, but society teaches us this is acceptable and this is not, or this will get you punished and this will get you rewarded.
And then you're left to try and figure out, well, what do I do with what I feel if I'm not allowed to express them, or it's only acceptable in certain ways. And the thing that's coming up for me too, as you're saying, with the fawning trauma response, and which is the people-pleasing attachment style, is how, it's trying to earn love. And then I'm thinking, again, because this is like my primary attachment style, so I'm thinking it for myself of like, and trying to get the needs met to belong and matter in this way, which is very indirect. It's like, in order to maintain a relationship and belong and like really matter to this person, I have to go along with what they say. I can't speak up and share my thoughts, my honest thoughts or opinions. So it's like this kind of multifaceted aspect to that. I guess like that's kind of what's coming up for me.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. So, what happens is that all of these things that we experience, that we hear, that we feel in childhood, they create these patterns in our mind, and they live in us as these wounds, right? And they sit inside our subconscious mind well into adulthood. And so we often have several of these wounds. And if we're still talking about the anxious preoccupied, the biggest wound there is I will be abandoned, which we mentioned, right? The fear. And because they would have experienced abandonment or perceived abandonment in childhood, and that caused them a terrible fear. But another big one, not good enough.
Oh, wow.
I am bad. I am going to be alone. I will be excluded. I will be rejected. I will be liked. All of those sort of carry a lot of weight. And why does this matter? Because core wounds, they really play into our thoughts, which build into emotions, which build into so how we show up in the world is so much rooted in these patterns that are in our subconscious, that for many, many people don't even realize that they're guided by these, right? But we're all guided by a set of patterns we developed really early on, and they do impact us.
Yes. And even what you were just listing, that feels very threatening. Like, I'm not enough. I'm going to be left on my own. Like, there is a real perceived threat to that, where you're like, oh no, like anything to survive. And what I'm really loving that you're bringing up with this and attachment styles is it's beyond basic survival, because I feel like that's where people so minimize this and they don't value it. A lot of people don't see this as so truly important and core to who we are as humans, because so often we think food, shelter, water, clothing. Okay, that's basic. Like, that is basic things that we need to just survive. But there's a whole other aspect that make us up as humans, which is this emotional part of it. And that's what you're really addressing. And the emotional part, which it's really what invites us into relationship with other people. And that is core to our survival beyond the basics. So I love that 100%. You're talking about this.
Yeah, 100%. So it is core to our survival, emotional safety, when we're really, really young, from like 0 to 3.
Okay.
Then emotional safety becomes less about survival as we get older and more about thriving in life.
Okay.
Right? So, Esther Perez will talk about how the quality of life is really determined quality of your relationships. And I always like to push that a little bit further and say, but the quality of your relationships is determined by your attachment style.
Wow. Yes. Can you expand on that?
I can. So the idea here is that someone who grew up with a secure attachment style, and we spoke about that briefly, but about half of the population in North America has a secure attachment style. And what that means is that they grew up in a home where they got pretty consistent, not perfect doesn't exist, but pretty consistent, predictable emotional attunement from one or both of their caregivers, but one enough.
Okay. So that's encouraging.
Yeah. One is definitely enough for a child to feel safe in their home, right?
Okay, yeah.
So, the child would have learned at that point how to identify their emotions, how to communicate. They would have learned that it was safe to communicate, and they would learn that, trust that the person I'm communicating to will respond in a healthy and safe way. Mm-hmm. And so what that might look like, parenting scenario is, you have a 3-year-old waddles into the kitchen and says, I want a cookie. And, there's a couple of ways that you can handle this. The secure caregiver will say, I could understand. I like cookies too, but we're about to have dinner. So how about we have one later?
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm acknowledging that you want a cookie. I don't blame you. Good. Timing is wrong. I'm not denying your request. I'm just telling you what we're going to do it later. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's acknowledging, it's invalid, it's validating, right? And
without needing to necessarily give them what they're asking for at that moment.
Yeah. You're still the parent, right?
Yeah.
So if it's the wrong time for a cookie because you're about to sit down and eat, chicken and green beans for dinner, which is a good selection, have that first, right? It's a great time to say, you know what? The cookie will be our dessert, but why don't you pick out the cookie you want? And I promise you'll have it after dinner.
I love
that.
Will
respond beautifully to that.
Yeah.
Another way you can do it is you could react emotionally, right?
Yeah.
So if you're anxiously preoccupied, you tend to have some pretty extreme, I would say, emotional volatility. Things can feel very overwhelming. And so, the child might come in and say, I want a cookie. And you might say, not now. Mm-hmm. The child might turn around and say, I want a cookie.
Yeah.
Okay. I've raised 2 boys, right? They're both in college. So I've been through this. Right. No, I want a cookie. And at that point, someone who isn't emotionally regulated will oftentimes, even not understanding, they will escalate it. Mm-hmm. So the most important thing you do as a parent, you have to regulate yourself first. Because your child is going to take their cue from you. So if you are anxiously preoccupied and you are distracted by an emotion you're having elsewhere or whatnot, and the child is trying to get your attention, you're probably not going to respond in a way that's healthy.
Yes. Okay.
You're going to probably yell, you're going to escalate, whatnot. I said no cookie, go to your room.
Right.
Right? What does that teach the child? They weren't heard. Okay? They can't ask for what they want. If they ask for what they want, they're going to be yelled at and punished. I was just sent to my room.
Yeah.
So what are we doing here? Right? So I think what's most important when we're talking about the quality of the relationships, and going back to the Esther Perel comment that she made, is that when we can create safety for people around us, that's when we can actually build authentic relationships with ourselves, with our family members, with our colleagues, with our romantic partners. Yes. But that's only done when you get to a place where you can be open and honest with yourself, and then open and honest with others in a safe way. Mm. And so, using the cookie example, you can say no because, well, the honest thing is that the cookie is not the right time to eat now because we're going to feed you good food first and that'll have the dessert. Okay. But the way in which you communicate it to the child, did you do it in a safe way that made them understood and validated, or did you threaten them, shame them for asking for a cookie?
Yes. Well, I want to dive into this can look like as far as creating the safety in relationships. But right before we do, I'm curious if you could give a practical example of what this could look like in that scenario of the child asking for a cookie where you regulate yourself. So like if the tendency would be no, like you ask again, you go to your room, like what would it look like before jumping to that to regulate yourself?
Yeah. So the first thing is that a lot of people, when they haven't learned emotional regulation at home, and I always like to say emotional regulation is a skill. So coming out of your home of origin, a lot of kids learn how to cook. Right? And some kids, they don't learn how to cook.
True.
Right. It's the same for emotional regulation. So some kids come out of homes and they know how to emotionally regulate and some don't.
Okay.
And so what it means is that when you're faced with a situation and you can feel within your own body, and that first takes understanding your own triggers and the physical sensations, the somatic sensations that you feel that indicate that you're frustration, intolerance is rising.
Okay.
Right? So maybe it's different for everyone. Maybe you start to feel your heart, beating a little faster. Maybe you feel a little headachy or you're dizzy or you notice some muscle tension, your neck, everything. Like your body's going to tell you your stress level is rising.
Okay.
We as people learn to listen to those cues, identify them and listen to them. So if the child is in that moment aggravating you, that's probably just one factor, right? Mm-hmm. You probably are trying to cook dinner at the same time. The phone is ringing. You're probably trying to do homework with another child. So you're spread thin, right?
Yeah.
I always tell parents, best thing you can do is if you recognize that you're already in a heightened emotional state is to not engage in that moment. Just say something like, listen, it's not the right time for me. Always stay calm. The minute you escalate and yell, it's gone sideways.
Okay.
The only time that I believe a parent should yell is if the child's safety is at risk.
Okay.
Watch the car, right?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a real threat. It's like, I need to be loud and get your attention now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, why are you raising your voice? You're teaching your child that you need to raise your voice in order to be heard and seen. Well, I can promise you that child's going to grow up into an adult that's going to do exactly that.
Mm. Wow. That's so good.
It's all modeling. So when you feel yourself like, I put things on a scale of like 1 to 10. So when you feel yourself rising at like a 5 or 6 anxiety and the phone's ringing and the doorbell's going and there's just too much going on at once. And the child is making a demand for your attention right in that moment. You can say, I need 5 minutes. Come back to me in 5 minutes.
That's
or
good.
I really want a cookie now. You can't have a cookie now. I really want a cookie. I know you're upset. Let's talk about it after dinner. I can't have this conversation now, but I want you to understand why I'm saying that you can't have a cookie, but let's have dinner. And then tonight, when we read you a story, I'll explain to you why I'm telling you this. Mm-hmm. So you can put distance. You don't have to retort right away. And what you're teaching your child too is that if they need space to process and to collect their thoughts, that they can do that too. It's reciprocal respect, because the conversations that I have with my kids now, if I say to them, well, what did you feel about that? And they would say, you know what? I just don't want to talk about it right now. No problem. Let me know when you want to talk about it. And my kids, again, are in college.
Yes,
right?
That's so good.
So we learned that really early on. I also, there was something that I did from the day my kids were born. And this always, because it helped frame my decision-making into a framework that they could easily understand. So from the moment my 2 sons were born, told them that my making and everything that you can or can't do is all going to be along these 3 lines. Your priority will always be, first and foremost, your safety. Secondly, it'll be your health. And thirdly, will be your happiness. in that order. If you want to do something that I deemed to be unsafe when they were younger, they would fidget. They didn't want to sit in the car seat. It was like a 5-point harness car seat. And I would say, we have no choice. It's for your safety. I know you don't like it and it annoys you, but your happiness is not important than your safety.
That's so good. Yeah.
So I'd explain it. It's like they wanted to stay up late, because there was a great movie that was playing. With it's time to go to bed. Your health is important. You need 8 hours of sleep, and that is more important than your happiness. So,
wow. Thanks for listening to part 1 of Let's Get Real. If you've been feeling stretched thin, stuck in survival mode, or like you've lost yourself in motherhood, I made something just for you. It's called the Overwhelmed Mom's Guide, and it's totally free. Inside, I walk you through simple steps to help you reconnect with who you are, find a bit more breathing room in your day, and start to feel like you again. You can grab it now. Just click the link in the show notes. You don't have to keep doing this alone. Let's take the next step together.